Okay, so you were just finishing up a story about Peter Graves. You said that he
Yeah, what happened was I made all these promises to Peter about elegance, because Peter is a very classy guy, that elegance and what have you. And the first episode of the new season, or the one that he was working on, when I went to see him, was out in the desert, and he's all sweaty and covered in grime, what have you. And the next time I saw him, it was almost as bad. So he used to look at me and said, "What happened?" you know. But he was there. He did a marvelous job for us. As I said, everyone got along with Peter. He was a pleasure.
Okay, about Mannix, if I could just get a couple of quick comments about some of the lead actors in Mannix.
Well, there's only one main lead actor. That was Mike Connors. Mannix came out of two writers came to see me, Lincoln Levinson, very famous in television circles, had done an awful lot, who understood what television series needed. And I made the deal with them, and I was the producer on the script with them, and the script was done, and we presented to CBS, and they liked it, Mannix, and I hired Mike Connors, and I needed a producer, because I couldn't produce it. I was busy running the affairs of the studio. So I gave it to Bruce. Bruce did a rewrite, polish on the script, and Bruce produced it. And we sold it. CBS liked it. Mike was the lead on the show. Without Mike, the show would have failed. Mike was there, did a marvelous job for us. When you have a professional working on a show, the 125, 150 people working on the show depends on one guy showing up. That's Mike. He's the lead. And when Mike shows up in a good mood, knowing his lines, gets things done professionally for 7 years, those are commendable people. The people who give you trouble all the time, upsets everything, upsets schedules, which means upsets budgets, upsets management, networks, what have you. So guys like Mike Connors are enormously valuable.
Did you think the show would run 7 years?
Never did. But obviously, it's Mike. The production was good. I must give I give a lot of credit to Bruce, who produced it. But Bruce's interest in music also was important to it. Bruce wanted to do a certain type of theme song, which was a jazz waltz, which no one had done so far as television series. So, and Bruce was very friendly, of course, we were, with Lalo Schifrin, who's marvelous talent. Lalo scored Mission for us between doing movies and such. In fact, I had Lalo later score Medical Center. And so Bruce worked with Lalo, and Lalo came up with this jazz waltz, which was marvelous and really opened the show so very well that when you hear it, you automatically take a liking to it. You want to hear more, you want to see more. So that was a big difference. But I didn't think it would last that long. I don't know anyone who thought it would last that long. A one-person show, detective, there have been so many of them, but it worked.
You said that when you left Paramount, you had a couple of quick offers, Universal, MGM. You chose
Right.
MGM.
Correct.
The challenge involved. One of your, or maybe the first success there was at the courtship of Eddie's father. Was that?
Went there, and one of the reasons I went there, I'll tell you a story that I haven't told anybody. One reason I went there, because MGM had under contract an actor named Chad Everett. And I didn't know Chad Everett, but I'd seen him in some movies. And I said, if there's ever a star of a television series, it's Chad Everett. Because I had been very fortunate in who plays what roles and what have you in shows, in choosing people. So I go to MGM and I call the casting guy, Al Triscone. I say, Al, can you set up a meeting, please, with Chad Everett? He says, what are you talking about? We released him. What am I doing here, Al? So I had to put the Chad Everett thing aside a little bit. And I wanted to get something done quickly. And Development is development. You can't just sit down and write a script and say, turn it in, yeah, this is what we're going to do. They had been working on this script. The prior administration at MGM had been working on a script called The Courtship of Eddie's Fathers, based on the movie that MGM had produced years earlier. And I said, I'd like to see the script. He gave me the script. Now, usually when a new person comes into a studio, you wipe out all the old stuff, right? Just get rid of it. I think that's a waste. If there's something good, you use it, and you give the guy credit. The prior group had overseen the writing of this script. Richard Powell wrote it, and I thought it was a pretty good script. It needed to be punched up here or there, what have you, but I thought it was pretty good. And I called a friend of mine, Jimmy Comack, who was a very talented writer, and said, Jaime, listen, this is what we're going to do. Come on over here, and I have this script, and let's see if we can get it in some kind of shape, and let's get it made. So Jimmy came over and did some work on it. We took it to ABC, and they loved it. So at the same time, a good friend of Jimmy's, a good friend of mine, was Bill Bixby. And I said, let's get Bixby into this thing. So we got Bixby into it. So now we had a good script. We had Bill Bixby, and we had ABC interest. Now we had to cast the housekeeper and the little kid. The housekeeper in the original movie was the typical Irish-American housekeeper, right? That you've seen 20 times on television. And I said, that's wrong. Let's get someone who usually would not work as a housekeeper. So it's a little different approach to the part. Let's get a Japanese housekeeper. And they said, you're crazy? I said, no, I want a Japanese housekeeper. I'm sorry. So we looked around, and in comes Miyoshi Omeki, who won an Academy Award. And she was soft-spoken and pleasant, and she read the script about dealing with Eddie and whatever. And we thought that was great. We hired Miyoshi. Then we sent out a call for the little boy to play Eddie. And a lot of different kids came in. We tested 3 of them. One was a Hollywood talent school trained little kid who made all the right faces and all the right moves and told the jokes right, what have you. One was kind of neutral kid, and one was a Mexican American kid from Oxnard named Brandon Cruz, who had never acted before in his life. And he was marvelous. He had a great endearing look, a great charm about him. So we looked at the test, and I said to ABC, we're going to hire Brandon Cruz. Oh, no, you're not. The first kid we're going to hire because he knows the moves. I said, it's not real. He looks like a Hollywood kid. We want some reality here. So, again, I made my speeches and got them all upset. And I said, we're going with Brandon Cruz, or don't finance us. Fine. But we're going to hire little Brandon Cruz. And they agreed. We hired Brandon. Jimmy wanted to direct the pilot. I said, no, Jimmy, you're too close to it. We're not going to do it. I'm going to hire a guy I know who's a very good comedy director named Al Rafkin, and you have to stay off the set. You just can't go on the set because you let Al do his movie, his pilot. So he agreed. Hired Al. Al directed, did an excellent job on it. We were cutting it together. No, I was on the set, and I'm watching what's going on. And Hollywood has a tendency, if there's an imperfection, they want to stop it. For instance, so the scene's in the kitchen, Miyoshi's there, Bill's there, little Brandon's there, and Brandon's drinking a glass of milk, and he puts it down, and he has a milk line on top of his lip, and they yell, cut. I go, what is cut? What are you talking about? Well, you can't. I said, no, that's a kid. That's what kids do. I said, and while we're at it, ask Brandon to make some art drawings and pin them to the refrigerator. Make it look like we're trying to do a real show. That's an emotional show about a divorced parent, of a little kid and the little kid's trying to get him married. That's what it's about. And there's this housekeeper who is who oversees the whole thing. So I said, let's do it again. And do me a favor, keep this on. We did it. The pilot was just lovely. I'll go back in a minute on the pilot. but we sold it. And one of the reasons ABC said that whole scene about the kid with the milk on his thing, when it was nominated for an Emmy, Comac and Bixby and Brandon wrote, and Miyoshi wrote on the nomination, thankful for the milk thing, and they sent it to me. I still have it at the house, framed and everything. But we wanted to do a different type of score, because everyone was doing the same type of score, and I did not want an audience show with a phony laugh track. I hate phony laugh tracks. So I said, we'll just do it film, no audience, but we need something to give it some kind of depth, music-wise. We heard a recording by a singer named Nielsen, Harry Nielsen. It was on the main title of Midnight Cowboy. Everybody's talking at you. And that's Harry. And so we called in Harry. We said, Harry, listen, this is what we'd like. We'd like you to score the pilot for us. However, we want you to talk part of the script. In other words, within the singing, there's a regular main title about welcome to our house, a little cute little thing that Harry sings, right? And Harry overdubs himself. When we get into scoring, forget the main title, scoring the main part of the pilot, I want lyrics that deal with what's the action going on. Like if Eddie is about to fall down the stairs, I want Harry in the musical score to sing, oops, he slips, or something, so that the whole thing comes together, where the score is just not the score, it's moving the story forward. And so that we did. And they loved it. Everyone loved it. And ABC picked it up, and we were on the air for like 4 years, 3 or 4 years. Good hair.
Was Medical Center a hit when it first hit the air?
Did the Medical Center pilot and had an actor in it that, because Chad Everett wasn't available, he was gone, no one knew where Chad was, worked on the script, hired an actor who was good for the part, but was a little stiff. But what I did is, because I always think a little differently, for the guest star, I hired Edward G. Robinson, which people said, you can't hire Edward G. I said, of course you can hire Edward G. Robinson. If you pay him a fair amount of money, you can hire Edward G. Robinson. We hired Edward G. Robinson, and he came, and he was in the show. And we surrounded it with some very good actors from New York and from here, Los Angeles. And we made the pilot. And the pilot was really good, but we knew we had made a mistake with the actor. He just did not fit in. He's a good actor, but did not fit in with what we were doing in the series. So I needed an actor. It always happened. I always need an actor. And I called Al Trisconi, the MGM casting director, who was just great. I said, Al, where's Chad Everett? We think he's in London. Get him on the phone. Tell him we'll hire him to do a television series. And tell him while he's there, we'll help him, our publicity department, appear on something on BBC to talk about the new television series he's doing. And Trisconi says, okay. So Al calls him back and says, well, I spoke to Chad, and Chad is, he's great. He'll do the series. But there's a problem with him I'm sure Chad won't mind me saying this. A problem with Chad appearing with BBC. I said, what's that? He says, he can't afford a suit. I said, wire him $200 and buy him a suit, and then get him over to BBC. So we did that, and Chad, he got his suit, he arranged for him to do an interview, so now all of the UK knew about this new television series, even before it was on the air, before anyone knew Chad Everett was hired. Chad came back, and it ran for 7 years. And I got word one day from someone who said, Chad says, if it wasn't for you, Herb, I wouldn't have any career whatsoever. He did very well for himself.
Was 7 years a surprise for you?
There was a void in medical shows. I used to like Medic, Richard Boone's show, which I thought was really interesting. and that was gone. And we did again people stories. If you do people stories that make sense, where people can relate to it, you know, what's fascinating about television is this. If I'm walking down the street with a movie star, right? People will walk by and look and whisper, there's so-and-so, right? But if I'm walking down the street with Peter Graves or Leonard or someone who's in television, they'll say, oh, hi, Leonard, how are you? Because Leonard is a guest in their home every week. And Peter Graves is a guest in their home every week. They feel there's a personal bond between them. A movie star is up on the screen and is too far removed from them. People like television stars. I can do better having a rally. I sent Greg Morris to Chicago because there was some event going on. First time he'd been out after Mission was on the air a little while, he was mobbed. They tore his jacket off him. And he comes back and he said, hey, man, what do you do to me? I said, I didn't know, Gregory. How do we know? They feel the presence of television people. They're guests in their homes. Very important. It really is.
You mentioned Then Came Bronson, which, though only on the air for a year, made a pretty big impact with people.
Oh yeah.
Was the actor, the main actor, Michael Parks, was he a good fit for that role?
Michael Parks was a perfect fit for it, because the pilot film, we had some interesting. Marty Sheen was in the pilot just at the beginning. It's a story. I had hired a man I knew called Denny Bart Petitclerc, who was a writer, who was formerly a crime reporter for this Miami Herald and the San Francisco Chronicle. When he was in Miami, he befriended a writer who was living in Cuba named Ernest Hemingway. They were friends. Denny knew the world. He knew the rough side of the world. In San Francisco, he, a crime reporter. He knew what was going on in that world. And I hired Denny on this basis that we will give him, he will get a pilot script to write, whether I sell it or not. And I then laid the deal off with Herb Schlosser. And I said, Herb, this is it. We'll write the script. You finance it. I don't know what the script is. Within a year, I'll give you a script. I have no idea what it is. He said, fine. We looked and we thought and what have you. The year is almost over. And Denny comes in and says, you know something? There's a friend of mine who's NorCal 1. He's head of the Hells Angels in California, because he knew that's Denny's world. He knows that world. And I said, great. He says, suppose we do a thing about a guy who has a bike, who's like me, who is a journalist, and sees so much bad in the world that he can't take it anymore. And he finally says, I'm out of here. And he gets on his bike with his saddlebags and he drives out of town and over the hill to see what's there. That's the concept. The man to see what's over the hill. NBC, I kind of cajoled NBC into financing the script, hired Michael. Michael I haven't seen Michael in years, a James Dean type guy. There's a volcano inside Michael that could explode at any time. He's very soft-spoken and he gets physical, and you're not sure how he's gonna react to anything. And I'll tell you a great story that happened, real story happened with him. And we made the pilot. It was a 2-hour film, and it was a journey he was making to find something. And along the way, he met Gary Merrill and Akim Tamirov, and we hired all kinds of known actors. Down in New Mexico was Akim Tamirov, who took care of orphan children and orphan Mexican children, and that story. And he finally got to San Francisco, meets a girl on the way, Bonnie Bedelia, what have you. And I loved it. Took it to NBC in a screening room. If you've never been in those screening rooms with a new pilot that they spent a lot of money on, there was Walter Scott, president of NBC, and Don Durgan, who was vice president of sales and schloss and what have you, and run the film. By the way, I love Aaron Copland, so I called George Dooning, who wrote Picnic, who scored Picnic, and is a marvelous composer. And I said, George, I want Picnic. That's what I want, that flowing outside traveling. And George did a marvelous score. So we had a really nice film, marvelous score. I won't go into the problems of shooting. Of course, there were problems with Michael, really. And I'm sitting there in this room with all these people, NBC people. Lights go out. Then came Bronson, the beautiful score. They run the opening once in a while. Michael's at the corner with his bike, and it's rush hour, and all the guys in the suits are in their cars going to work, and Michael's there on the bike with the Navy watch cap on and the saddlebags on the bike, and a guy next to him rolls down the window and says, "Hey, you going somewhere?" And Michael says, "Yeah," and the guy said, "I wish I was you." And that's the time. That's what it's about. Lights come up. Walter Scott looks at me and goes, "Where's the pilot we financed?" I said, "That's the pilot." He said, "That's not a pilot." And they were really angry at me. Went back to Los Angeles. I said, "Let's test it." We took it to Preview House. I had mentioned earlier, NBC used that. It tested beautifully. Everyone saw themselves as, I wish I could be that guy. I really wish I could. And we did the series. It was a tough series. We shot everything on location. We were all over the West shooting it. Quick story about Michael, which is very, very interesting, which no one has ever heard before. I was up in San Francisco. We're on North Beach section, the big Italian restaurant. They had outdoor tables. And we're eating, and it's Michael, and it's Denny Petitclerc, and it's me, and it's Bob Justman, and I forget who else was there. A few other people were there. And we're eating. And this is, lights, gaiety, a lot of, people walking back and forth. And a guy comes up in a cap, dirty face, with an overcoat, draws a knife, and puts it next to Justman's neck and says, "I want money." And everything stopped because no one knew what to do except Michael. He got up and he walked up to the guy and he said, "Hey, man, what's wrong?" And the guy looked at Michael and he put down the knife and, "Hey, man, come talk to me." And Michael took him over and started to talk to him. Turns out he was a stoker on a freighter. He's a Mexican guy. Stoker on a freighter that had left without him. He was without a passport, without money, without anything. And he reacted. Michael knew what was wrong. No fighting with the man. We gave the guy some money. We wished him well. And he went on his way. And if it wasn't for Michael, I don't think he would have interviewed Bob Justman. This guy was serious because this was the end of his rope, this guy. Right. That's how Bronson started. It's fascinating.
You were at MGM in 1970. How did you come to produce the documentary film Elvis, That's the Way It Is?
Elvis. MGM had Elvis under contract. Elvis had stopped performing. This is the bulbous Elvis time of his life. Had stopped performing. I had met Elvis once before, going all the way back to 1953 when I was in the mailroom at the Morris office. One of the Morris office clients was Eddie Arnold, the country western star, and his manager was Colonel Tom Parker. And Tom Parker was back at MGM, at the Morris office then, with a new boy he discovered. He found him in Memphis, and his name was Elvis Presley. And he came into the Morris office, into the conference room, and he was going to sing for the agents. So they know this new talent. And all the agents are there, and I sneaked in, and this new guy is singing, and it's Elvis, right? So I met him just to say hello because everyone said hello to him. He didn't remember me. He didn't remember anybody. Fade out. I'm at MGM. MGM has a contract with him for one more picture. He did a whole bunch of pictures for MGM. We were talking what to do, and the thought came up, let's do a documentary on Elvis, his return to singing. And I said to Aubrey, Jim Aubrey was then president of MGM, and I said to Jim, I said, well, we have to get someone to produce this, to watch over it. He said, well, you should do it. I said, I really don't have time. He said, you should do it. I don't think they wanted to spend the money to hire a producer. We hired a director named Dennis Saunders. We hired a very good cameraman. In fact, we had about 5 or 6 big cameras shooting 35. And what we did is we did a documentary dealing with Elvis coming to MGM with his little group, his Memphis gang, to rehearse. And the byplay, and Elvis on the bicycle driving around the studio, and Elvis doing this and Elvis doing that. And so I got to know Elvis. And then we took him to the International Hotel in Las Vegas. It was owned by Baron Hilton, and he was on the MGM board of directors. So it's all a family little group where Elvis, the return of Elvis, which we there with, I don't know how many cameras we had there. And we had many, many cameras doing his opening night, and we filmed it. And we filmed the afterwards and this and that. And Dennis Saunders really did a good job directing it, and we had really good editors. And the camera work was, forget who the cameraman was. It was a very, Lucian Ballard, I think, was the cameraman on it. And we ended up with a really interesting documentary. Elvis, That's the Way It Is, with, I don't know, many of his songs. And it was exciting and fun to see, and we sent it out without any producer credit on it. Because Aubrey said, you can't have your name on it. He said, all right. That's what Jim had that thing in his head. I said, fine. And it wasn't until later that they put my producer credit on it. Because Warner Brothers, Ted Turner bought the MGM library when Kirk sold everything. Right. And the library, and I was in it, of course, and Warner Brothers took it, because Turner was part of Warner Brothers, and recut it, and plus had a bunch of old footage of other people, by putting people in the audience who weren't there. I mean, Cary Grant was there because he was on a board of directors, but Sammy Davis Jr. wasn't there, but they put them all in, and I got the credit as one of the producers of it. And it went out, it did okay, and then years later I got a phone call saying that the Elvis fans, in hundreds of thousands apparently, had voted the best documentary on Elvis, and they flew us to Memphis, and we spent some time in Memphis.
How was Elvis to work with?
Elvis was a pleasure. There are 2 people I have worked with that the advance notice was always trouble. Elvis Presley and Frank Sinatra. Both of them were so professional. Elvis was Mr. Solow this, Mr. Solow that. Frank Sinatra, if he had a problem on the shooting, he'd call me personally. Herb, listen, what about the so-and-so? I explained it to him. I said, let me talk to the director and Burt Kennedy, and we'll figure out what to do this way. Thank you very much. He was there on time, knowing his lines, no griping, no nothing. He was a pleasure. That's all you can ask. You want a professional person.
What project was that?
This is a movie at MGM called Dirty Dingus McGee. It was a kind of spoof on Westerns with Jackie Lamb, and Frank played an outlaw. It was fun.
Then after MGM, why did you leave MGM?
Well, I did about 25 movies. Did movies with Bobby Altman and Paul Mazursky and David Lean and Herb Ross and Vadim and
right.
Mike Hodges. We did a whole bunch of movies. They were doing well, but the whole attitude of MGM was to sell the place. All the makeup and hair was sold. All the backdrops were sold. All the props were sold. Everything was sold. They wanted to sell the land and break it up and into corners, because in corners you can put gas stations. This is the largest studio in the world. They could put gas stations on all the corners, right? Happily, the Culver City Council decided you don't do that. This is MGM. And it was really falling apart, and Jim was becoming, as Jim was when he was president of CBS, he'll do it his way. I could tell you a whole story about David Lean, Jim, to recut one of David's movies over in Ireland that I was at, working on with David. And so it finally became a little untenable. So I said, fine, let me leave, and I left.
Okay. How about a quick comment about Man from Atlantis?
Man from Atlantis, I had my own company. It was a sister company to Hanna-Barbera, because I had been vice president there. Taft Broadcasting financed it, the company, and a friend of mine, Mayo Simon, a fine playwright with whom I'd worked, and Mayo, who had written a lot of big movies, we started to talk, and someone had mentioned to me, a guy in our business affairs department, what about if a body ever floated up on the beach, and it was from Atlantis? And I thought that was a good idea, but it wasn't a developed idea. You had to make a television series. So I called Jerry Stanley at NBC, said, Jerome, this is it. A body floats up. I said, you know my house in Malibu with the beach below? I lived on a bluff. He said, yeah. I said, okay. I looked down one morning, a body floats up, and I go down to see what the body is, and it's still breathing, but it has webs on its fingers and its feet. And I call someone, a doctor, and the doctor comes and takes the person, helps the person doesn't speak English. And it turns out he's from Atlantis. Okay, what do you want? I said, I want a script. Got a script. Mayo wrote the script. I oversaw the script with him and developed it with him. And then when the script was written, I sent it back to NBC. He said, here it is. And they wanted to do it. And the casting was interesting there also, because my first... I had an office at CBS in the Valley then for Atlantis. And later moved to MGM because they had the big tank, because they needed a tank for this. And we put out a casting call, and in came a guy named Christopher Reeve. Just came into town, was in New York doing a soap opera, and he was spectacular for it. And I said, Chris, if you want the role, you have it. And a few days later, he called back and he said, I'm an actor. I don't want to have to wear things or do this kind of stuff. I said, I understand that. Thank you very much. He later did the pilot version of Barb Carol, Ted and Alice for television for Paul Mazursky. Chris, of course, later became Superman. So he really went into that big. He would have been great in the role. However, in comes a guy, before he came in, I had a casting lady, and she saw a commercial for a Pizza Hut or something. And it was a young, very skinny, but interesting actor in it. And I asked her to have him come in. And in came Patrick Duffy. And Patrick walked in, and I'm talking to him. And Patrick has a great sense of humor. And his training as an actor is almost the way they train actors in the UK. He learned boxing and fencing and horse riding and motor. He does everything. And I talked about swimming, and he said, hey, I'll do this, the flip thing, whatever. And so I said, let's do him. NBC did not want him. NBC had found some huge hulking bodybuilder in Hawaii. This always happens. And I said, no, he's a man who lives in the water. He swims. Find me a fat swimmer. They're all svelte. They're all thin. They're all muscle. That's what they are. They're all built. You can see the muscles, but they're... No, I said, I always carry. I said, no, we're not going to do it again. It's finally they say, okay, we'll do it. The problem is Patrick, and I have the Patrick screen test, by the way, still. He looks dreadful. He's so underweight and so thin. So we hired a very good stunt guy, who also a physical fitness guy, named Paul Stater. And Paul used to do the stunts for Wayne years ago, before then. And Paul took him in hand, and in 6 weeks bulked him up, and he looked great. And he was enormously cooperative. We had him in the water. We had him floating in seaweed, for hours on end at this beach in Malibu at night. We had him. Taft Broadcasting owned Marineland on Palos Verdes Peninsula, and there was a pool in there, and we had them train a dolphin to race Patrick. Well, we used we sped up the camera, what have you, but Patrick was in with the dolphin, and the whole thing worked very well, and Patrick always won the race, of course. And we put Patrick to tests, and he was spectacular. He was the most cooperative human being. And so we made the pilot as a movie, and NBC did not think would make a series, and they went ahead and they ordered 4 movies. So I produced four movies. Hired Bob to come over and do the physical production for me. And that was Atlantis. It went on to 13 weeks, and it was against Happy Days, and it didn't make it, and it got canceled. But it was a good show.
What was your proudest career achievement?
Proudest career achievement. I would imagine, well, it has to be the work I did at Desilu. Because that was all my work. That I had no management on top of me. I just went ahead and did it as the way I thought it should be done. That's probably it. There's certain things I'm proud of, certain movies or other television shows, certain episodes, working with certain people. Because, when you examine either television or movies, when you're dealing with film, you're dealing with the same equipment, basically, that they dealt with 50, 60, 70 years ago. The only thing that's changed are the people. My agent used to tell me, if you don't have the horses, you can't win the race. It's really very important. That goes for almost anything in life. It's dealing with the people. The kind of people you have with you, they make it work. You may have all the great ideas in the world. You may have all the great financing in the world and business acumen. But if you don't have the people to make what you envision making, it's not going to happen. That's why I admire everyone who works in the business. I admire all the technical people, the art people, the prop, anyone who contributes to it. That's so important because those are the people who make it. The same machines have been around for years. They may look a little smaller, the same camera and the same lighting and the same everything else. The moviola has changed, it's been replaced, so they cut differently. But bottom line, it's the people. And if you can put together the people, and I thought at Desilu, I put together the people.
What kind of advice would you give to an aspiring television executive?
I would just say learn the craft. Too many people will sit down, television executives who will say, let's do it this way, when they have no concept whatsoever how doing it that way should be done or can be done. Critics, too. I had a big thing with a critic who was a television critic in an important newspaper who writes a critique of one of my shows without any idea what he's talking about. They just blab off to be cute. My advice is, if you're going to talk to a writer and tell a writer what to do, you better know the skill of writing, how it's done, how a writer works. If you're going to go on a set and tell a director, you should do this, you should know what a director is doing and how that functions. That goes for everyone. You don't have to be a great composer or a great film editor, but you sure should know what a film editor does, what a cameraman does, what a prop man does, what the craft service guy does, the guy who makes the coffee. You should know how the business you're in, Mr. Executive, how that business works. Because if you don't know it, you're a fool. You really are. You're not doing your job. You don't know your craft. That's what I think.
How would you like to be remembered?
Oh, goodness. There are two things that I think people... One, I don't think anyone should ever retire. I'm against... I think retirement is wrong, but everyone to himself. I think everyone should leave something behind. I think to live and then die on earth and not leave anything behind is terrible. We all have a particular talent. My ability, turns out, it was good working with people and guiding projects, either television shows or movies. I'm now writing with a book. I've written other books. I enjoy that. I want to leave something behind. I just really want to be known as someone who who tried to do something well. Some of it turned out and some of it did not, but I left something behind. I think that's the key.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure.